What's up guys, it's Z here, welcome back. Today we're gonna take a look at the rogue decks of the following format because due to Power of the Elements the format is going to change dramatically. So now let's take a look at the decks that I feel like are going to be the most represented in the rogue version of the format, just because there are so many decks that we have in the game that you consider rogue right now, because a lot of decks do have their own niche ways of being able to play around the meta. So if any of those decks that you're thinking about are not in the list, then comment down below and explain why you think these decks are going to be really good in the upcoming format. They could be like a top 20 list I make with a lot of decks that can be actually decent in the upcoming format, but these are the top 10 that I feel like are going to fare better against the best decks. So without further ado, if you enjoy the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now let's get to the list. Number 10, Dinomorphia. Dinomorphia is a really interesting deck. It's a deck that can basically do what Eldritch does, but it does have more consistent ways to find floodgates. The thing about Dinomorphia is that it does have a way to get a skill drain very consistently, but it's very susceptible to spells and traps, which is the weakness of the deck that prevents it from being higher up on the list, because while being able to prevent all monster effects, this deck loses to cards like Super Poly, Dark Ruler No More, etc. So if you want to play this deck, you need to max out on cards that can basically negate spells and traps. If you can do that, if you can protect your monsters from spells and traps, then it's going to be very difficult for your opponent to play, because they will not be able to activate any monster effects that have higher attack points than your life points thanks to Rexterm, so you're basically going to lock them down very easily, and the deck does have huge beaters, so it's not like it struggles to go for a game regardless. So this is why Dinomorphia, I feel like as a number 10 for the slot on the list, it's decent, because it's a deck that can catch a lot of people off guard and can win you some games for free. Number 9, Invoked. Now, the thing about Invoked is that it's a deck that can be splashed with so many different things. You can splash it with Branded, you can splash it with any other things that you want, like Dogmatica, you can even play it with Eldritch, being able to make another deck. So Invoked basically includes all the categories for all the decks it can play that can bring out a lot of monsters. It's a deck that sees the play it needs to play every single time, because the deck is still had full power. We have 3 Meltdown, we have 3 Alistair. You are going to see the plays you need consistently. You can splash it with any other engine that you feel like it's going to get you through the format, which is why a versatile deck is a deck that can basically be included in every single format, just because it can use any tools that are necessary in order to combat the best decks of the meta, which is why Invoked, we're going to be seeing it pretty much forever, because it's just one of those decks that can do that. It doesn't require a lot in order to make it in a deck, so you can just splash it with anything you feel like it's necessary to defeat the best decks, which is why I feel like it's decent for the number 9 slot on the list. Number 8, Madolche. Now, I'm a really big fan of this deck, and I just feel like it's one of those decks that can do so much with so few cards, because 1-card combos, you can go into OTKs. It's another deck that can play Dishifter similar to Flanderies, and if Tier Laments become one of the most popular decks, which, let's be real, they're most likely going to become, then this deck could have an insta-win button against that deck, because Shifter is a deck that can just outright destroy Tier Laments, because they need their graveyard in order to play. All of their effects come from the graveyard. This is a deck that can main deck cards like Goes and Match, which basically kills Sprite, because half their monsters are fire, half their monsters are dark. So the deck does have tools to not only go first, but go second, which is why I really love this deck, because it's a deck that can also play a lot of hand traps on top of everything else, so you can do whatever you want with this deck. It's a deck that can be adapted anything you need to in order to be able to defeat the best decks, which is why I feel like putting it number 8, maybe even higher, but I just didn't want to put it too high because of bias. I feel like number 8 is great for Madolche. Number 7, Earth Machine. Now, Earth Machine is one of those decks that can catch you off guard completely. It's one of those decks that can get so many big monsters on the field. Going second, this is a very, very scary deck. It can OTK out of nowhere, even under cards like D-Barrier, because when people think about this deck, oh, they think this is an Xyz deck, so we're going to side D-Barrier against it. The thing is, Earth Machine can bring out huge monsters without even relying on the extra deck. It has cards like Fortress, it has cards like Ruin Force, it has cards like Citadel. This deck can bring out beaters like nothing. It can OTK you even under D-Barrier, and being able to go first as well, being able to set up cards that can not necessarily defend you against your opponent's plays, but basically defend you against your opponent's push, if it makes sense. This is a deck that does not bring out a lot of negates. It brings out cards that are going to make you survive, so you can basically come back during turn 3 and OTK your opponent back. It's the game of the deck. It's basically a deck that can bring out cards like Dora, which is unaffected. It's not going to disrupt your opponent too much. Maybe Derek Rain, it's just going to pop a card, but again, it just makes sure that you're going to turn 3, so you can basically push back your opponent and get the win. Number 6, Agent. Now, Agent is a deck that got new support recently, and it's one of those decks that out of nowhere, it became a deck because of new support. We were going to get it on a structure deck, but we got Ghost from the Past instead. It did not make that much of a difference. It's not like the Infernoble incident when the cards were expensive. No, it's not like that, because this deck was never going to be tier 1 and we knew it, so the cards are very expensive. You can pick up the cards if you're a fan of the deck in the past for very, very free. And it's one of those decks that can give you access to Christia, which Christia is an instant win button against a lot of decks, especially people are prepared for it. If they don't draw the out, then they're not going to be able to play. It's a deck that with just one Venus, it can do a lot of plays. It can OTK with a lot of being able to get free beaters like Hyperions. And yeah, the deck is really, really good. And it's a deck that can also play a lot of different hand traps. It has access to Herald of Orange Light, which is one of the best hand traps in the game if you can play it. So yeah, it's a really good deck and can combat a lot of other decks just because of the sheer power it has by being able to play with just one card like Venus and like Earth and all those other combos it can do. So I feel like this deck, for those of you enjoyers, the Agent archetype from back in the day, if you're a fan of the deck, then pick it up again and you can have some really good success with the deck. Number 5, Sunavalon. Now, Sunavalon basically can be included with a lot of different stuff. Play pure, although I don't really recommend it because then you're going to lose to a single hand trap, but the main optimal way to play the deck is if you combine it with both Therions and Adventure Packets. If you can pick up both of these engines, even though it's a really expensive deck for a rogue deck, I know that, but if you like the archetype and you can pick up all of these, then you're going to have a really strong deck in your hands because both of those engines help with playing around hand traps while also putting up more negates on the board and more beaters on the board to go for game, even if your initial play doesn't go. Because Sunavalon, if it doesn't go interrupted, it can do a lot, but the thing is it can be interrupted very, very easily. So those other engines help you with to basically push through all those hand traps your opponent is going to have. And if you manage to do your combo, then this is one of those decks that can bring out so many interruptions that your opponent is just not going to be a playthrough and they're going to lose on the spot. Number 4, Lyrilusc Tri-Brigade. Now, this used to be a really meta deck back in the day, but the ban list just made sure that it was not going to be anymore. But it's not a banned deck to this day, even though it lost the really big tools like the extra copies of Recital Starling and of course the Simurgling to get access to Barrier Statue. It's still a deck that can do a lot of stuff because all the Lyrilusc monsters are really good at extending hand traps because they don't take up your normal summon, they can just special summon themselves on the hand, they can use them for rank 1 to go into Utopic Future Draco, all those other stuff. And you do have also the Tri-Brigade package that can either enable Lyrilusc by sending Cobalt Spire to the grave, or they can be used just as pure extenders to be able to get more interruptions on the board. So the deck does play around hand traps quite well. It does have the tools to go first and second because it can get access to Zeus with Assembled Nightingale. It can use Shuraik to basically get free spot removal on the board. It does have really good monsters that it can summon going first, like Utopic Future Draco, Appaloosa. It can use access to Revolt. It has double Dragon Lords, go for bounces. The deck is really, really good, even though it's not nearly as good as it used to be. A lot of people are still playing it, and they have seen some success in actually big events with this deck, so this is why I feel like a number 4 slot on the list is very deserving for an old meta deck that is still really nice to play. Number 3, Heroes. Now, Heroes, because of Dark Law, they are one of those decks that, depending on the meta, they can counter some of the best decks, because I mentioned again that Shifter kills Tier Elements, then Dark Law does the same thing, because Tier Elements cannot play without their graveyard, so if they become more relevant than Sprite, and people played more than Sprite, then you are going to see it more often, then Heroes are just going to outright destroy them. Dark Law, and the deck does have tools to deal with pretty much anything. It has Plasma for a Floodgate, it has Acid to basically look backroad decks, it has a lot of different stuff. The problem with Heroes is that sometimes it can lose to a single hand trap or maybe even 2, depending on the hand, but that's basically a problem of the deck that is not very easy to solve. But this deck can only get better, because in Brothers of Legends Crystal Revenge we're going to get Ian Shuffle and Wake Up Your Elemental Hero. Then that's when this deck is going to be able to become one step ahead of all the other rogue decks, just because it will have access to Aqua Dolphin, and we all know how good Aqua Dolphin is in any deck that can bring it out for free. We've seen it in Goki, we've seen it in Infernoble, and Heroes are just going to use one of their old tools that was never consistent enough, but now it's going to be, and once this time comes, then Heroes are just going to become better. But even now, the deck is really, really good. If you're a fan of the deck, if you know how to pilot the deck, because the deck does require really good pilots in order to be able to see success, because people are just making fun of the deck because a lot of people play it because it's an anime deck, and when you're playing an anime deck, most of the audience playing it, they don't really know how to play the deck against the meta decks, and this is why the deck doesn't have the best win ratio. But if you know what you're doing with the deck, then you can definitely get some really free wins because of the tools this deck has. Number 2, Adignister. Now, similar to Marinces, Adignister relies on effect monsters, but the thing is, this deck can bring out an effect monster that has 6,000 attack points, and against a deck like Sprite, the only way they can deal 6k unaffected, if they don't play Underworld Goddess of the Closed World in the extra deck, of course, but you can't rely on that, but the only inherent way to play against it is by using Cut Shark on a Sprite, on a negating Sprite that has boosted itself to 30k, so it can become 64. So if you can keep your negate for Cut Shark, then basically your opponents will not have an out if they're playing Sprite against this deck. This deck can do the entire combo with just one Achichi, so this is basically a thing that can do a lot of plays with just one card, similar to a lot of the meta decks, so you can keep space in your deck for hand traps to be able to go second, or for extenders to be able to boost through hand traps yourself. So yeah, even though it's not as good as Marinces, because it doesn't have easy tools to cards like Totally, which make Marinces just a little bit better than Adignister, I feel like it's still a really powerful rogue deck that a lot of people are going to play. It's an anime deck, so a lot of people enjoy it more than any other deck that you're going to see that has not appeared in the anime. anime, so this is why it's another reason you're going to see it more than any other deck. So yeah, Adignisters, really good deck, have a win condition that can basically auto-win you a lot of games. They're consistent, they have space in the deck to play hand traps. You cannot ask for much more for any deck that you can pick up to be able to combat the meta, and it's completely budget. This is one of those most budget decks that we've seen in a while after everything got written except the tuner monster, but still that is not expensive either, so you can pick up the deck for free and have some fun and win a lot of games. And at the number 1 slot, we have Sky Striker. Now, Sky Striker is always the closest to being a meta deck, but thing is, Sky Strikers are only good because of Mystic Mine. I feel like everyone can agree on that. If Mystic Mine was not a card, then Sky Strikers would not have the tools to be able to combat the meta, because Sky Striker is a deck that wants to play the slow game, but it's not easy to force that into any of the meta decks, which is what Mystic Mine is here for, to be able to slow the game down. And when Sky Strikers get to play their own game where they're engaging you every single turn for the plus, that's when the deck becomes scary. But again, all of that is because of Mystic Mine. So the deck sees a lot of success because people are not prepared for Mystic Mine. They lose to it right away. We've seen so many deck outs on stream recently, which I feel like is absurd because we all know that Mystic Mine exists at this point, so I just don't feel like why people do not play outs to the card. So yeah, as long as people get caught off guard by Sky Strikers and Mystic Mine, then yes, Sky Striker is still going to be able to see success. It got first place at a YCS, it got second place at the WCQ. The deck with Mystic Mine can play how it wants to play, and when the deck gets to do that, that's when Sky Strikers become unbeatable, because the amount of advantage that they can amass in an extended period of time throughout a game is absolutely ridiculous. The thing is, just doesn't get to do that because the other decks can pressure it to oblivion, but Mystic Mine helps with all that. So yeah, Sky Strikers, it is getting more support eventually, but again, without Mystic Mine, is that support going to matter? We're just gonna have to wait and see. I feel like it's not going to be much, but again, Konami has shown in the past that they are just not interested in hitting Mystic Mine, so as long as it's a 3, then this deck can play it, and it's going to be one of the decks that you need to be prepared for, because otherwise you're going to lose a lot of games too. So yep, that's the list, guys. Comment down below any other decks that you feel like are going to be really good as a rogue decks for the upcoming format, because when the format changes and the rogue changes as well, because we have to combat different types of meta decks, so we need other strategies like in order to be able to win. And there are a lot of other decks I could have mentioned, but I'm leaving this to you because otherwise this would be a 30-minute video. So yeah, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.